everyone, and welcome to today's webinar session around designing for everyone, how accessibility improves UX for all. I'm thrilled that you all have joined us today. My name is Neha, and I'm an AVP of Enterprise Accounts at Bay1, and I'll be the moderator for our discussion today. Now, while we give everybody some time to join, I would love to share a little bit about Bay1 and also a little about why are we hosting this session today? What is the intent and what are we trying to achieve? So at Bay1, we believe that exceptional user experiences aren't just beautiful, they're inclusive by design. For years, we've partnered with organizations to create digital solutions that don't just meet business goals, but genuinely serve every user who interacts with them. Our human-centered approach has taught us something important. When you design with accessibility in mind, you don't just help users with disabilities, you create a more intuitive, usable product that benefits every single person who uses them. So why are we hosting this session today? What is the intent? Today's conversation matters more than ever. We are hosting this panel because accessibility is having a moment, and it's about time. While the business case is compelling, with UX investment returning up to $100 for every dollar spent, what excites us most is the human impact. We've assembled this panel of remarkable UX researchers because they are the ones in the trenches, discovering user needs, testing assumptions, and uncovering insights that lead to truly inclusive products. They understand that accessibility isn't just about checking boxes or avoiding lawsuits, it's about recognizing that temporary injuries, aging, different languages, wearing tech-level comforts, and yes, permanent disabilities, they're all part of the beautiful spectrum of human experience. This isn't a lecture about compliance standards. It's a real conversation about practical approaches that make products work better for everyone. And now, without much further ado, I would love to introduce our wonderful panelists. I'd love to start with Eldita. Eldita Thurani is a senior user experience researcher and Fulbright scholar with over a decade of experience leading complex, innovative projects that unlock user potential through accessible design. She currently leads projects on a smartphone team where she pioneers new approaches to revolutionize user independence and engagement. Convinced it's the key to building universally beneficial products. Her work has a wide ranging impact, from informing the UN Development Programme's national strategy to enhancing government transparency and establishing a UX core team for a software design company. Recently, her work on a product that helps blind people take photos was featured in a Super Bowl commercial, significantly impacting brand identity for companies like Google. Welcome, Eldita, and thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Next, I'd love to welcome Charlie. Charlie is a human factors UX researcher on a smartwatch team, where she focuses on the unique challenges of designing for wearable hardware, while also contributing to software insights, because smartwatches are only as smart as the systems that power them. Her career began in public health research, supporting federal contracts that served diverse and at risk populations across the US. And she later worked in fast paced market research with clients like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. With a Master of Public Health from UNC Chapel Hill, Charlie brings a pragmatic, impact focused approach to inclusive design, grounded in the belief that designing for those with the highest needs ends up benefiting everyone. That is so beautiful, Charlie. Welcome, and thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. And last but not the least, I would love to welcome Max. Max leads a horizontal research program aimed at a leading cloud photo platform, delivering experiences users truly value, not just moving growth metrics. He's originally from Portland, Oregon. He moved to the Bay after undergrad to study neuroscience and decision making at UC Berkeley. Following some professional twists and turns, his interests and skills landed him in UX research. Outside of work, Max enjoys watching movies, skiing, cooking, and following basketball and soccer. Max, welcome and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Neha. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So let's dive in with our incredible panelists. Today, we'll discuss a few different things. from fundamental definitions to actionable steps you can take tomorrow. Our goal is simple. You'll leave with practical ideas and renewed inspiration to build more inclusive solutions. So let's start with the beginning, with a question that might seem obvious but often reveals fascinating perspectives. So, what is accessibility? And what does it include? So, even before I start this question with our wonderful panelists, I would love to ask this question to our viewers. What do you guys think is accessibility and what does it include overall? Please share your thoughts in chat and we'd love to read them. So, Max, how do you define accessibility and what does it include in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I come from a little bit of a different world, and accessibility means to me making products free of friction for everyone, regardless of their abilities or level of familiarity with a product or feature. For me, this could include everything from making our UI more navigable for screen readers, to making icons that are recognizable across generations, to ensuring our designs have sufficient color contrast and providing features that make all users feel empowered and capable. So on my team, we approach this from a slightly different angle than what you might initially think of when you think of accessibility. We do a lot of work to bridge these sort of generational gaps. So new designs are not only appealing, but also understandable and intuitive to wider audiences. Younger audiences, as you can probably imagine, have vastly different mental models for using technology based on their kind of lived experience than older generations would.
Wonderful.
And to further kind of amplify Max's thoughts here, accessibility really is a broad topic that spans many different needs beyond what may initially be thought of and top of mind, like personal permanent disabilities, just as an example. This, of course, is important to it's an important group to keep in mind when creating accessible solutions, but it's also important to remember that aging and situational limitations like a new parent holding a baby or recovering from a surgery are all everyday realities that our personal technology should be able to support us with from an accessibility standpoint.
Thank you, Max and Charlie. I love how you've broadened accessibility to include not just permanent disabilities, but also generational differences in everyday situations. It's about removing friction so all users in any context can feel capable and in control. Now, this next question, it touches on a common misconception and opens up a broader lens on how accessibility impacts everyone. The question is, accessibility is often misunderstood as being only for people with disabilities. Eldita, how do you approach accessibility with that broader inclusive mindset?
This is a good question, Neha. Thank you. I want to talk about accessibility by first describing the inclusive mindset, which essentially means that products consider a full range of human diversity with respect to ability, language, culture, ethnicity, gender, age, and other forms of human differences. It simply means that we need to consider this range of diversity for the product to be universally beneficial. Susan Goldsman, a famous author and advocate for inclusive design, she was involved in designing inclusive place spaces, had this famous quote that summoned the idea pretty well. Inclusive design doesn't mean you're designing one thing for all people. It means you're designing a diversity of ways for all people to participate in an experience so that everyone has a sense of belonging. This inclusive mindset is the foundation of accessibility, which moves these principles from theory into practice by informing how to create products and experiences that are usable by the widest range of people possible. Accessibility as a practice ensures that a product's features, whether they are digital or digital interfaces or physical spaces or services, are understandable and usable with people with diverse needs. But the truth is that accessible designs present a huge impact. They don't just impact people with permanent disabilities. It's a practice that benefits everyone. A famous example is the curb cut effect. Engineers designed curb cuts, small ramps and sidewalks, that were originally installed to make it easier for people in wheelchairs to navigate. However, these ramps proved to be an unexpectedly useful feature for many other people, including parents pushing strollers, travelers with rolling luggage, delivery workers with hand trucks, people on bicycles or skateboards. The curb cut effect illustrates that designing for accessibility is not just helping a small group. It often creates a better, more convenient experience for everyone. It serves as a powerful argument of a broader concept of universal design, showing how equity-focused solutions can lead to widespread societal benefits. Of course, there's other examples as well, like closed captions on a video benefiting not only people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also people who are watching something in a loud environment, or a user who is multilingual and is using captions to learn a new language, or someone who's trying to understand an actor who has a strong accent. Similarly, well-lit ramps have people using wheelchair, parents pushing stroller, etc., etc. So these are just some examples that speak to accessibility and inclusion as a core kind of ideas to pursue in UX research and design.
Great. Yeah, and just to add to that, that was a great answer, and I think you covered most of the bases there. I don't have a ton to add. I'll just add that, again, accessibility isn't just about, physical or sensory abilities or cognitive abilities. It's also about mental models and just sort of the lifelong experience people have had with technology. So a user who grew up with physical buttons and file menus, for example, has fundamentally different expectations about how technology should work than somebody maybe younger who grew up with touchscreens and gestures. So for an experience to be truly easy and empowering, it has to work for both types of these users. Just as an example, a younger user might find swiping up on a photo to see the details intuitive, but an older user might not discover that gesture or might not think of it initially. If we only rely on the gesture, the feature becomes inaccessible to them, or it becomes a paper cut that might add up and sort of degrade the holistic experience. And so I'll just, reiterate, by designing for these different generational extremes, we create a more robust product for everyone, or one that's more accessible for everyone across generations.
Absolutely agree with you, Aldita and Max. Accessibility isn't just about permanent disabilities. It's about designing for the full spectrum of human diversity. Now, sometimes, as we all know, accessibility isn't ignored. It's just not seen early enough. What are the blind spots teams face, and how can they build awareness sooner in the process? Charlie, I would like to start with you on this question. Where do you often see teams slip up, and how can they proactively avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, teams, I think, often unintentionally overlook accessibility during product research and design phases due to just a lack of awareness or a focus on the average user. And as a result, at the end of the product development phase, teams will find themselves trying to kind of retrofit elements of accessibility into the product after it's already finished. And honestly, that's really where teams miss the mark, because accessibility should be consideration right from the start. And so, to be even more specific, in practice, some common pitfalls that you might see in research specifically is recruiting able-bodied participants only, which of course then leads to a biased understanding of user needs and the data. And it might also look like neglecting to offer testing sessions with assistive technologies like screen readers, keyboard navigation, voice controls, or even just not building in enough time in testing to work at the pace of someone who is neurotypical participant or someone with a physical limitation. And then kind of on the design side of things, some other common oversights might include, assuming that accessibility is like a separate feature, being added later or nesting it into a settings page rather than an integral part of the design process. Or even failing to consider color contrast, something as simple as font sizes, which can kind of make text unreadable for certain people who experience whether color blindness or have low vision.
And I agree with Charlie. The best way to integrate an accessibility mindset in the product building is by integrating an accessibility mindset from the start, which means grounding our research in lived-in experiences of the community we want to work with. So to make that accessible product, we must make sure that our research process is inclusive from day one, meaning including people with a full range of abilities in the conversation, but also in co-creation sessions. By centering their lived-in experiences, we can build a product that's not only compliant, but is genuinely useful to everyone. I know for some researchers, the thought of interviewing a person with a disability can feel intimidating. And it's understandable to feel a bit intimidated if you've never worked with a community before. One might wonder, am I being sensitive enough? Am I asking the right question? But what I learned from my extensive experience with this kind of research is that most people with disabilities are very open and proud of their lived-in experiences. They want us to treat them as we would anyone else, with respect, curiosity, and a focus on their unique perspectives, not just the disability. On top of that, companies will typically have resources, persons, or teams who can advise on how to recruit or approach or even make sure you include people with disabilities in your work. And finally, I want to share one of the most powerful methods that I use a lot, co-design or participatory design, which is not just about getting feedback, but it's a method which revolves around a true partnership with a community you're designing for. With co-design, we invite individuals from a community, like, for example, blind low vision community, to become core members of the design team. They sit side by side with our researchers, designers, and engineers to co-create solutions. This direct collaboration provides a deep firsthand understanding of these lived-in experiences, their challenges, their aspirations with technology. And the insights we gain are not just valuable, they're often transformative, leading to truly groundbreaking products that have a profound impact on everyone.
That is so beautiful. Thank you, Charlie and Eldita. Waiting to retrofit accessibility is a costly mistake. Starting early and partnering with users with lived experiences helps create smarter, more inclusive products. Now, designing for everyone starts with listening to everyone. When it comes to research and testing, how do you ensure you're capturing a truly diverse range of experiences? Charlie, I'd love your inputs again on this. What are some approaches or tools you use to ensure your research and testing includes a diverse set of voices?
Yeah, embracing participatory design or co-design, as Eldita suggested, is definitely a strong strategy that meaningfully involves users in the design process as a creator, rather than the traditional method of simply being a test subject. And so this looks a lot like in a practical setting is spending research sessions brainstorming solutions and building out prototypes, actually partnering with the participant. And in the context of accessibility and inclusivity, this type of activity is so important because it really shifts the power dynamic and allows the test individual to vocalize their expertise in their own experiences. So I just want to amplify that. But another strategy that hardware teams specifically could be considering is how they can leverage multimodality, which is it means using various sensory and motor channels to design products. And so essentially that means a device could provide feedback through visual display, audio alerts, haptic vibrations, and to ensure optimal accessibility in maybe a wearable product, for example, which is what I work on. It's crucial to test how someone might use each alert interface on an individual basis, in addition to how they experience them all simultaneously. And so kind of keeping with that example earlier of the sidewalk curbs, when you approach a crosswalk, you might notice that there is a light indicating a walk sign or a red hand for stop. And this might even be paired with distinctly colored tactile pavement on the ground that feels physically uneven and is often distinctly different color from the gray pavement, maybe a yellow or a white. And there's also oftentimes now even an audible sound or phrase that comes from the crosswalk button, guiding you on whether you should go or should wait. And so this is really a real world example of leveraging multimodality to support many different needs, but it also strikes a balance that the feedback is given in a way that doesn't overwhelm someone who has access to all the alert modalities at that same time. So it really is a balance.
That is so amazing. Thank you, Charlie. Such a great reminder that treating users as co-creators and designing with multiple sensory channels in mind, it leads to solutions that truly work for everyone. Now, as we all know, real world users, they don't really fall into neat categories. Let's dive into how you design for people with intersecting needs. So, Eldita, this is my question to you. How do you account for that kind of complexity in your design thinking?
Mhm. To account for this complexity, I tend to focus on foundational design principles that benefit everyone rather than creating a checklist of features for each user group. For example, instead of designing a separate senior mode with larger text, I ensure the core design allows for dynamic text resizing and adjustable font sizes that were mentioned before that all users can customize. This benefits not only aging users, but also those who have low vision or someone viewing the product on a smaller screen. Another example is designing for cognitive load. A user who is aging, learning a new language, and relying on assistive tech will likely have a higher cognitive load. We can address this by using clear, simple language and predictable navigation patterns. The product should be intuitive and easy to understand, reducing this mental effort that is required to complete tasks. So, something like this is beneficial even for the general population user who is maybe a multilingual user and may not be fluent in the product's primary language, as well as a user with cognitive disability or someone who is stressed or distracted or is even experiencing low vision at the moment.
And to add on to Aldita's point about foundational design, there really is a vast network of publicly available research that we can leverage to understand universal kind of design principles. It's not necessarily always starting from scratch or reinventing something new and innovative, but just applying established best practices to create a strong baseline of accessibility from the start. And so universal design, being about creating single experiences that are flexible, works for the widest possible range of people without needing those specialized versions, and essentially taking what's known and already working out in the market, testing it how it applies to your product, and then using your own research to fill in the gaps and move forward from there. And so this approach really works for software and hardware products. Sometimes you need to fully reimagine a project or a product. And other times it's really just those tiny minor tweaks that make the world of a difference for someone.
Wonderful. Thank you both. This is such a great reminder that flexibility and simplicity at the core makes products work better for the widest range of people without needing separate versions. Now, it would be unfair not to talk about AI and accessibility and how they blend together. AI, as we all know, is reshaping how we think about accessibility, from automated captions to personalized user experiences. But with rapid innovation comes new challenges. Let's dive into how AI is influencing inclusive design. Max, how do you see different generations engaging with AI powered accessibility tools? Are there noticeable differences in adoption, comfort levels, or expectations between younger and older users? And how should that influence inclusive design?
Sure. Yeah. So AI is, a new and emerging technology. And just like any new and emerging technology, younger users or people that have grown up immersed in technology often treat AI as a creative partner or expect some sort of seamless integration with their life and other technology that they use. In contrast, I think that older users are generally a little more pragmatic. They're a little more, their kind of mental model for how technology should work is a little more established. And so they're a little more skeptical of anything that sort of breaks that mental model. So they're more likely to view AI as a tool that must be reliable, controllable, and solve a clear problem in order to kind of add value to their very well established way of doing things. So to bridge the gap between younger and older generations, I think that inclusive design, as Neha mentioned, should offer flexibility. So providing both automation for those who want it, and also clear manual alternatives for those who want to feel more in charge. A clean interface that clearly communicates what the AI is doing and why, builds like this essential trust with otherwise cautious users while creating a better, more intuitive experience for everyone. Again, the reason for this divide boils down to different mental models and expectations. Older users built their technological expertise with decades of direct, explicit commands and more manual, tactile control, while younger users grew up with more fluid and like systems that kind of anticipated and adapted to their needs, like what we're seeing with AI.
Wonderful.
And if I could offer my perspective, I would say my perspective on this is that AI has indeed enabled superior features and accommodations for people with disabilities. We can all think of smart summaries for the neurodivergent user, maybe scene description for the blind user, and who knows what else is coming. But we should be conscientious about the way it ends up impacting marginalized communities. AI presents a critical divide when we look at how people with disabilities interact with it. While many users are concerned about control, for this community, the stakes are far higher. They often face a difficult trade-off, sacrificing privacy to gain the full benefit of AI-powered assistive technology. This isn't a choice between private inaccessible system and public accessible one. Rather, it's a situation where the promise of a more functional life might compel users with disabilities to share some deeply personal information. This can include biometrics from speech or sign language tools, explicit details about their disability for personalized features, behavioral data from their interactions, or even sensitive conversational topics like health concerns. The fear is a loss of control, where a system might mislabel an individual without consent or store personal data in the cloud or make frequent disruptive UI changes that can undermine the affected accessibility user's muscle memory.
And if I could just round out some thoughts here, I think these were all really good points. But of course, as we all know, AI is evolving at such a rapid pace. The models that we're using today are already so much more sophisticated than just a year ago. And in a year from now, I'm sure they'll be even more advanced. But this rapid evolution makes it even more critical to remember that AI is really only as smart as the data it's trained on. And so to build out these truly intelligent systems, we do really have to create models that are helpful and secure and respectful of the people who are using them. And this is exactly where these co-design principles that we were discussing earlier become non-negotiables to make sure AI serves us all in a respectful way.
Absolutely agree. These are some really great points. Thank you for sharing. And to close with my final question for the day, big impact often starts with small steps. Let's close with something practical. What is that one actionable change someone can make right away? Max, what is that one actionable step anyone on a team can take tomorrow to build that more inclusive product?
Right. So I don't have something super concrete that you can do, but rather a way that you can. I think my main takeaway from this would be just to kind of reframe your definition of accessibility, in that accessibility does not necessarily mean disability. It just means, as Neha mentioned earlier, that people come to your product with different expectations and different abilities, and you need to design accordingly. What I've touched on today is, recognizing that older and younger generations have different mental models based on their lifelong experience with technology. And I think a lot of people, or sometimes people, talk about older people as being like, technologically illiterate or something like that. And while that's not like a clinical disability, it's still a difference in expectations and abilities amongst older and younger people, and something that's worth acknowledging. So I guess one small but meaningful thing you can do is try to take this definition into account and then ask yourself, who are you leaving out? On my team, we're really focused on capturing the sort of hearts and minds of Gen Z users or younger users, but oftentimes that comes at the expense of the preferences and abilities and expectations of older generations. So that's something that we constantly need to balance.
Wonderful points. Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. A meaningful step I think that really product teams can take, kind of thinking in the realm of hardware and software, is conducting a multi-model feedback audit. Asking questions like, is critical information in your product available in at least one non-visual way? So as an example here, if a user inputs information into a form online and it returns with a red error, is there also a screen reader announcement or some kind of distinct sound? And so essentially just by running an audit and testing these alternative feedback options, and doing so without looking at the screen, teams will pretty quickly uncover gaps in accessibilities in their product.
Yeah, and just to echo what my colleagues here have said, I do like both your points, and I think, for example, Charlie, to your point, like there is such a method as heuristic evaluation where you can have a colleague who is experiencing that disability test the product, go through the steps, and give you feedback. If you don't have the time, if you need to be more scrappy with your research on the resources, you can even go that route. But yeah, the thing one can do starting tomorrow is basically, I agree, to change the mindset from accessibility as a feature to accessibility as a mindset. This means approaching new feature design decision making by a simple question. How would this work for someone who is, let's say, visually impaired or has a motor disability or with a high cognitive load? Just by starting to ask that question as researchers, we begin to uncover potential barriers and naturally start researching and designing more inclusive experiences for all. It's not about big, intimidating changes. It's about a habit of simple, human-centered inquiry. And if you're a UXR and you don't know where to start, just start by familiarizing yourself and hopefully incorporating participatory design as a research method in your toolkit.
Great points. Thank you, Max, Charlie, and Eldita. These practical tips really show how small changes can have a big impact. Starting accessibility early, involving real users, and testing with assistive technology prevents costly retrofits and leads to better, more innovative products for all. With that, I would now like to open it up to our viewers for their questions. This is your chance to ask anything that's on your mind about accessibility, UX, or the thoughtful approaches our speakers just shared. Please share your questions and we'd love to answer them. So this first question, it comes from Becca. The question is, question for the panel, if there's time, how do you foster strong collaboration between designers, researchers, and developers to ensure that the accessible design vision is carried through to the final product or deliverable?
I can take this question if or maybe we can answer together. I don't know if there's a way you guys want to do it, but I just wanted to iterate that, as UX researchers, we know that part of our role is also to educate our colleagues on kind of like how to understand, how to build empathy with users and see things from the user's point of view. And this is the same with accessibility. So we can become those advocates that we should be actually in our collaborative efforts in every meeting, in every sort of scoping of a research project that we conduct in order to understand some usability problems or to understand some concepts that we want to develop, we can bring this perspective by simply asking questions that we talked about before, like how this product or this design direction or this design consideration could impact a wider variety of users. Another thing is to consult previous research. As I said, companies, organizations have, and I think Charlie spoke to this as well, have resources, and there's literature out there that can help us build this knowledge so that it's easier for us to have the competence to discuss and to bring accessibility when we're having conversations in a collaboration with other cross-functional colleagues like designers or engineers, etc. I think, Charlie, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, you were very thorough. I think that was your point about what foundational knowledge your organization already has was going to be one of my initial points. But another key thing to keep in mind is unintentionally when we get bogged down with the day-to-day working in organizations, especially if you work in a large organization, is we unintentionally silo ourselves into our, whatever our department or role is. And so whether you're in research or if you work in design or something separate, is a lot of times research teams, or at least I try to encourage the stakeholders to sit in on these sessions to see what they look like in action. So you can see where, maybe our timelines aren't allowing for accessibility concerns, or maybe we do need to add in additional components because a product concern arose out of, a couple of sessions that we weren't anticipating. So being really willing to see what other teams outside of your own have worked on, or what hasn't worked for them as well, I think is a really helpful way to ensure that design, the vision is carried through throughout from design to deliverable. And then in that regard, to kind of round out, again, what Aldita said is there is so many different organizations out there that have tried and failed and succeeded, and we have such a long way to go, that just keeping in mind that any forward movement is progress. We're striving to get so much more inclusive. We have so much more work to do, that even if you do take a step in the right direction, it's not perfect. That's still meaningful.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful inputs. And thanks, Becca, for that wonderful question. This next question comes from Vijay. The question is, great insights from all the panelists. My question for the panel, what are the biggest misconceptions designers still have about accessibility in UX?
I can start with this one. I'm a UX researcher, so this might be a bit of a biased approach. I love the designers that I do work with. I think oftentimes we don't test our assumptions. We wait until research to test the assumptions. And I would really love and continue to encourage all of our designers to step away from the product you're designing for a little bit if you have that time, and come look at it with fresh eyes or a colleague and ask them, is this intuitive? Or someone who really hasn't ever really interacted with the product, bringing in a UX researcher, asking the opinion before we go into the research phase, so that research doesn't have to say things that I don't want to say stating the obvious, but it leaves room for research to actually uncover more profound meaning, as opposed to just being like, oh, this text should be a little bit bigger.
And if I may add to Charlie, because you just had a wonderful point and you echoed my thoughts on this. And I too I love my collaboration with the designers I work with, and I'm learning a lot from them. And from one very experienced designer, I learned that, and he overcame this on his career. So this is a learning coming from the designer. Personalization is not necessarily all the time the solution to making things more accessible. Like for the more inexperienced designers, they tend to just allow for customization, personalization of the experience in every phase of the product, so maybe everyone can customize it. I think the idea is to come up with a simple design solution that takes the burden from the user to have to navigate through different menus or through different features to enable, disable, make it so intuitive that it's just serving across a large user base.
Wonderful points. Awesome. This is another question. When accessibility requirements conflict with other product constraints, like tight timeliness, limited budget, or performance concerns, how do you decide which accessibility improvements to prioritize?
Does anyone want to take this question? I have an idea to start with, and I'll give you time to think. So one method that I mentioned before that is really not costly and that works in a very tight budget and timeline and resources in general is this heuristic evaluation, which is essentially you have a CUJ, critical user journey, that the user should be able to perform with your product, and you ask a colleague or someone who experiences the disability to go through those steps. You run a quick intercept, and you try to understand what are the major blockers that will let the user not go through the full flow using that product. And that's a quick way with very little effort, or you can do it yourself. You train yourself. I learned to train myself, for example, to use TalkBack, which is a screen reader for blind and low vision users. And then I perform a different, when I get a prototype, I perform different functions, and I want to see if it's screen reader adaptable, so I can give that fast, quick feedback. Another way is to just run accessibility testing with a few other colleagues, you gather to. There's ways to go about it, but I believe that you can make it work even with the biggest constraints.
And to add on to that, I was thinking intercept testing initially as well, kind of the cafe testing where you can get that quick feedback. Again, it's not always a flawless solution, but it could be just enough to get a couple of data points to then bring into leadership or to bring to other product teams to say, hey, there could be a bigger problem here that we're not focusing on. So when you have those timeline constraints and those budget constraints, it's building a bigger case for those teams as to why we should care. And, you know, to Aldita's point too, if you even take the time to try and work through these on an individual basis and then finding one or two other people who actually experience the permanent disability or the constraint where they might need more comprehensive support from your product, then you get a little bit more of a comprehensive perspective. And again, it's a low end size, but it might just be that 1 or 2 points to push you in that right direction.
Yep, I agree. I don't have too much to add in specific, but I just say in general, when you're working with tight timelines, a little bit of data can go a long ways in advocating for your idea or for users or whatever accessibility concerns you have in this case.
Great points. Now, this is another question coming from another LinkedIn user. The question is, how might future AI innovations help bridge the generational gap in accessibility?
I guess I can take this one. I've been talking a lot about generational gaps. I think I would like to ask a follow-up question, but I think in general, I guess the key is just making sure that whatever future AI innovations we have in the future on whatever product you're working on are flexible to generational preferences. I think that AI is a very powerful tool, and it can pull on sort of the world's wealth of knowledge. And so I guess I think the power in AI is its flexibility. So, and its ability to kind of understand the user. So I think that maybe in the future with AI and sort of the way things are headed on the team that I work on, one thing that I guess could help in the future is just giving it better context for who the user is and what their intent is.
Yeah.
I just think that a lot of the time, and this is, I mean, it will take a while to get there for users to trust AI enough to give it like personal details about their life and, tell it how old they are and give it more context about themselves as a user. But I think once we're able to get to that point, and the AI or whatever model you're using is able to understand the user and sort of understand their background, not just their age, but also kind of the different like technological expectations and experience they have as a result of being certain ages, then it can probably give like tailor results and make the experience more customized or personalized to the person. And so I guess I all in all, I think that this boils down to AI better understanding the profile of the user and accordingly the intent of that user, so it can give kind of results that are tailored to that user's expectations. And those could be generational expectations, or they could be, anything. It could be cultural expectations, it could be gender, or pretty much any demographic you can imagine that might have different experience or expectations for using technology and AI in particular.
Wonderful. We have a follow-up question from Simran. So the question is, how can AI be used to create more personalized and adaptive accessibility solutions for different types of disabilities?
For me, comes to mind immediately is AI's ability, hopefully, it will adapt in a way that it can understand and interpret speech delays, impediments, or any form that is not otherwise, what you would expect of a standard, different. I'm blanking on the word here, accents even. I think as we build out these tools and again use more diverse and people and data points to train these systems, that they can then be leveraged in more unique situations where someone can use the voice to text and it can interpret what is needed in that moment. So again, going back to that baseline of how are we building, how are we training these models, to then reimagine, the capacity of what it can deliver.
Yeah. And if I may just add quickly to that, AI is showing immense sort of promise in just be understanding and describing things for people, for example, who cannot see or who experience low vision. So like just being able to describe the scene, or just being able to describe the context, just being able to describe a single photography is unlocking immense opportunities for people to participate in activities that were harder before AI. So just knowing how to kind of like use these large language models in order to provide and to open opportunities for people with different abilities, it's should be at the core of every product design, along with what Charlie just said with this accessibility mindset that should start at the beginning of each design process.
And Eldita, your point too is even more exciting because that voice, translation of photos and things, it serves the highest need population. But then you can also think if you receive a text while you're driving, to hear or have your phone say that to you so that you are not looking at your phone while you're driving, that then supports an even broader population. And then you can build kind of a business case of why this is so important to have in our product. Now it is a must-have for everybody, and pretty soon, we're all relying on it.
And I hate to say this again, that's an excellent point, because I feel like we're just going back and forth with each other, but it really is an excellent point, especially in building the business case. Sometimes, regardless of how much successful a product shows a promise to be, you always need to have a business case around funding that project and the resources needed. So being able to achieve that, I think, just understanding that it can solve situational impairments aside from regular permanent disabilities, that's golden.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. These were some really amazing points to share. Now, this next question comes from Hitesh. Great insights from all the panelists. My question for the panel: how do you make sure an accessible design doesn't just meet guidelines, but also feels intuitive and enjoyable for everyone?
It's a hard question, Hitesh. Because there's a fine line between like meeting guidelines and being enjoyable and intuitive. But as I said before, we always have to strive to build simple solutions that are kind of like flowy and user-friendly, but also enjoyable, with like simple navigation menus and with multi-modalities. And I feel like if we go in that direction already, we are striving to build an enjoyable product. Yes, the accessibility standards, each organization has different accessibility standards that asks you to meet. Oftentimes they coincide to also like follow this path of an intuitive design. So I feel like just being conscientious of both can lead you to the desirable final product that's enjoyable and accessible at the same time. That's my take on it. What do you guys think?
I don't have that much to add. I would just say that, I mean, I don't often have to work with accessibility guidelines. So my intuition would be, once you sort of meet these internal benchmarks, you treat the groups that you're designing for like any other user. and you would kind of approach the problem from there. So once you've sort of designed for accessibility, then you can kind of and you're trying to figure out how to design to make it enjoyable or intuitive. I feel like then you can kind of include the group that you're designing for with the general population, because you've already accommodated their needs in particular, and now you can kind of just start designing for everyone.
Yeah, really embrace the iterative design process. You might start with the guideline, and the first iteration's gonna be boring, or checks that box, and then how do you go from there? How do you make it more intuitive and more fun? And that's, for us, that's where research comes in, right? To kind of get that feedback. So it definitely is a journey.
Wonderful. Great points. And this next question comes from Bakhtun. What are the most overlooked accessibility features in digital products that, once implemented, unexpectedly improve the overall user experience for everyone?
My favorite one's the Zoom feature. I think that one's the most obvious, right? You would think, okay, Zoom, everyone needs Zoom, but being able to zoom in and make text larger and smaller actually is an accessibility feature.
Yeah, that's true. And one thing that everyone knows and a lot of us uses is the closed captions. But they started as an accessibility feature. They're widely used by people around the world for all the reasons I mentioned before. Maybe when they struggle with an accent of the actor, or just to understand, to learn a new language, or just to hear on a loud environment. That is like a good example.
Wonderful. So now, sorry, Max.
Okay.
All right. This is going to be the last question for our session today. And the question is, where do you go for inspiration or examples of great inclusive design?
I can take this one first. I actually like to utilize public spaces, getting out into parks and museums and those types of public spaces where everyone is welcome and encouraged, because there really isn't that profit first model. There isn't those. It's to enjoy the time and space there, and so you will know a good inclusive design when you see it. When for example, paved sidewalks are very wide and flat versus maybe a wheelchair ramp that is very, very steep, like you're climbing Mount Everest, right? It's kind of, they reveal themselves really quickly. And so kind of just getting out into the community, leaning into kind of public health and seeing what public policy is doing is where I personally go for inspiration.
Yeah, I love that example, and it resonates so much with like my source of inspiration, which is public park and children playgrounds. We have some excellent examples, like in San Jose, for example. I live in San Jose, and there's a Rotary Play Garden, which was designed to be fully inclusive and accessible for a range of disabilities, and includes things like 3D maps, and includes things like flat surfaces and wheelchair access. And it's just amazing to witness creations like that, and just like to get inspired, that the world of design, of even physical spaces, is going in the direction we want. And I get inspired that I can follow that kind of direction as well in my work.
Yep, and I agree. That's what I was going to say, is just, I think it's sort of all around us. And I think it's really interesting, when you're going about your daily life, to kind of bump into something that you see is clearly designed with accessibility in mind, and kind of think about how those things from the physical world can translate to the digital world.
Wonderful. This conversation is just the beginning. I hope you all are walking away with ideas you can bring back to your teams, whether it's rethinking your research methods, questioning assumptions, or simply listening more closely to users with different needs. I would like to share my heartfelt thank you to the wonderful panelists for spending the time with us and sharing these valuable inputs about such an important topic, accessibility. Thank you so much. And I also would love to thank our wonderful viewers for such an engaging conversation. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Please join me next time as we dig into more aspects of UX. On Thursday, September 4th, I'm talking with Becca Segal, Lead UX Program Manager, about empathy and impact, how UX drives success and strategic alliances. You can find the link to RSVP in the chat. We hope you'll join. Until then, thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.